Everyone thinks they know the nun. You see the black habit, the glowing eyes, the jump scares that made you spill your popcorn. She lurks in the hallways of the Conjuring universe like some kind of holy terror cosplay. But here's the correction right off the bat. The real demon behind the nun isn't a sister of the cloth at all. Her name is Valak, and she has been creeping through occult manuscripts for hundreds of years. And trust me, he looked very different before Hollywood put him in a wimple. Most people remember the scenes. Lorraine Warren stalked in the dark, the iconic painting that came to life, the whispers of a demon hiding behind the faith itself. The image is so strong that even if you never saw the film, you've seen the memes. The nun has become a modern horror icon, up there with Pennywise and Freddy Krueger. But icons are tricky. They get so big, so familiar, that we forget to ask the simple question. Who was this supposed to be in the first place? Because underneath the cinematic layers of jump scares and special effects, there's a strange medieval figure buried in old grimoires. Valak shows up, not as a nun, but as something that would honestly look more at home in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. A child riding a two-headed dragon, commanding legions of demons like some kind of terrifying toddler general. That's right. Hollywood's sharp-toothed nun was originally written down as a boyish figure on a dragon in the 16th century. Not exactly the face of a Catholic nightmare, but certainly enough to keep exorcists and theologians up at night. So how did we get from there to here? How did a medieval demon general become the scariest nun in cinematic history? Why does Valak, this obscure creature from dusty books, still terrify audiences when dressed up in a habit? And what does this say about us? About our fears? About how horror reinvents old demons for new nightmares? That's the real question we're chasing. Who really is Valak? Where does he come from? And why has he haunted imagination from medieval manuscripts to Hollywood blockbusters? Because if you thought you knew the nun, think again. When we leave the movie theater behind and step into the dim libraries of medieval Europe, Valak starts to look very different. The nun's face vanishes, the rosary beads drop away, and instead we find him inked into parchment, tucked between prayers, spells, and warnings that most people in that age would never dare to read out loud. This is where Valak truly begins, not in a Hollywood screenplay, but in a world where scholars, priests, and occultists believed that cataloging demons was as essential as cataloging stars in the sky. The 16th and 17th centuries gave birth to a strange sort of literature known as grimoires. These were not novels or bedtime stories. They were handbooks for magicians, priests, and the desperate, full of invocations, seals, sigils, and lists of spirits with all their frightening details. To the medieval mind, demons were not vague monsters or shapeless fears. They were officials in a dark kingdom, each with a name, a rank, a form, and specific powers. Think of it like a demonic version of a royal court, complete with dukes, presidents, marquises, and kings. Only their loyalty belonged to hell rather than any earthly crown. Valak enters this stage in two of the most famous grimoires. The first is the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum, written by a Dutch physician named Johann Weyer in the 1500s. Weyer was a student of the even more infamous magician Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, and he produced one of the earliest printed catalogues of demons. He didn't mean it to encourage magic, at least that's what he claimed. Instead, he framed his book as a warning about the dangers of sorcery and the trickery of spirits. But by writing down names, descriptions, and hierarchies, he gave these entities a strange kind of permanence. And among the many dukes and lords listed in his work, there appears a curious figure named Valak, or sometimes Ualak. The second, and even more influential source is the Lesser Key of Solomon, a compilation of earlier texts that was widely copied and circulated across Europe. This book, sometimes simply called the Goetia, became a cornerstone of Western demonology. Here too, Valak makes an appearance, his description consistent enough that we know we are looking at the same spirit. Both texts describe him not as a monstrous nun but as a child with an angelic face riding upon a two-headed dragon. His appearance is deceptive because behind the innocence of his youthful form hides immense power. The books claim he commands dozens of legions of demons, acting almost like a general leading armies of spirits into the world of men. The image is striking. Imagine a boy, cherubic and sweet-faced, but seated on a beast with two snarling heads and scaled wings that blot out the sky. He carries no weapon, but he doesn't need one. His authority comes from command alone. He speaks, and legions obey. This blend of innocence and authority, purity and corruption, is what made Valak so distinctive in the demonological imagination. Unlike the horned devils or grotesque monsters that filled paintings and sermons, Valak was something subtler, almost more insidious. He embodied the idea that evil can come wrapped in beauty, that corruption might hide behind a child's smile. To understand why scholars of the time catalogued demons like this, you have to picture the intellectual climate of medieval Europe. The church preached about spiritual warfare, about invisible battles between angels and demons that shaped human destiny. At the same time, natural philosophers and occultists were obsessed with order. If the cosmos was a grand chain of being, stretching from God down to the lowliest worm, then surely the demonic world had to fit somewhere in the chain too. They believed that by naming, ranking, and describing these spirits, they could gain some measure of control or at least knowledge. It was taxonomy for the supernatural. This wasn't just abstract theorizing either. Exorcists, theologians, and magicians took these catalogues seriously. Knowing a demon's true name and rank was believed to give you leverage over it. That's why the grimoires go into such detail, listing not only appearances but also powers. Valak, for instance, was described as a spirit who could reveal hidden treasures and lead seekers to serpents. It's an oddly specific power, but one that links back to his imagery. The child on a dragon becomes a guide through dangerous places, able to summon serpents and yet protect the summoner if he chooses. There's a practical angle here too. Medieval people were genuinely obsessed with treasure hunting and believed that hidden wealth was guarded by spirits or dragons. In that context, Valak becomes a kind of double-edged figure. Invoke him correctly, and he might grant you access to riches. Invoke him foolishly, and you risk being torn apart by the very serpents he controls. It is both temptation and warning rolled into one. What makes this all so fascinating is how far it is from the cinematic nun. The Valak of grimoires is not female, not cloaked in religious garb, and not particularly tied to Catholic imagery at all. Instead, he is part of a wider system where demons functioned almost like mythological archetypes or characters in a cosmic bureaucracy. His youthful form is angelic, a reminder that even the most innocent face can conceal immense darkness. His dragon is the symbol of chaos, danger, and hidden forces beneath the earth. His authority over legions cements him as more than just a curiosity. He is a power to be reckoned with, even if he appears harmless at first glance. As these texts spread, Valak's identity became cemented in the European occult imagination. He was not the most famous of demons, but he lingered in the margins, copied from book to book, whispered about by those who studied forbidden knowledge. If the Goetia was a demonic who's who, Valak was the strange entry that caught your eye because it didn't quite fit. A child on a dragon is harder to dismiss than another goat-headed monster. It sticks in your mind, makes you wonder, forces you to consider the unsettling blend of purity and corruption. And this is the root from which everything else grows. Long before Lorraine Warren dreamed of a cloistered figure in her visions, long before Hollywood designers gave us glowing eyes in a chapel corridor, Valak was inked in Latin on parchment. A child, a dragon, a commander of demons, a figure pulled from the fevered imagination of scholars who believed the invisible world was just as structured as the visible one. So when we ask who Valak really is, the answer begins here. He is not a cinematic nun. He is not even primarily a monster. He is a relic of a worldview where the unseen world was catalogued like an army, where knowing a name was power, and where demons were both warnings and temptations. In the medieval imagination, Valak was a paradox. Childlike yet terrifying, innocent yet commanding, angel-faced yet bound to hell. And it is from this paradoxical identity that the Hollywood reinvention would one day be born. Because you can only keep a demon buried in books for so long, eventually someone will find the name, dust off the description, and reimagine it for a new generation. But before we get there, it's worth sitting with the original image. A boy with a dragon, riding not into a theater jump scare, but into the imagination of Europe's occultists, where he would remain for centuries, waiting for his next disguise. For centuries, Valak remained trapped in dusty tomes, known only to the kinds of scholars and occultists who had the patience to wrestle with Latin manuscripts and arcane sigils. He was not exactly a household name. You could ask the average medieval villager about demons and they might mutter something about the devil, witches, or goblins, but not Valak. His survival came through a paper trail, copied from the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum into the Lesser Key of Solomon, echoed in derivative texts, and preserved in the secretive ritual manuals of Western occultism. In a sense, Valak lived quietly, like a name on a long list, waiting for someone centuries later to flip the page and take notice. Those manuals weren't designed for the public. They circulated in small circles, passed between ceremonial magicians, Rosicrucians, and later occult fraternities that believed the hidden names of spirits still carried weight. By the 19th century, with the rise of occult revival movements, these grimoires resurfaced in print and translation. Suddenly, English readers could access works that had once been cloistered in Latin. The names of spirits, their ranks, their powers, all were there. For those who dabbled in ritual magic, Valak was not forgotten. He could still be invoked, still imagined as the cherubic child perched on a dragon, still catalogued as a commander of legions. Yet the transition from these esoteric libraries into pop culture required something more. That something came in the 20th century with the rise of paranormal investigators, writers, and the strange blend of religion and entertainment that came to dominate the American imagination. Enter Ed and Lorraine Warren, self-described demonologists whose case files became a foundation for modern horror cinema. The Warrens framed their work as both spiritual warfare and public testimony, presenting demons not as abstract medieval curiosities, but as active threats lurking in haunted houses, cursed objects, and yes, even churches. It is here that Valak begins his cinematic transformation. The grimoires had described him in bizarre mythological form, but Hollywood needed a monster that audiences would immediately recognize and fear. A child on a dragon was curious, perhaps even unsettling, but it lacked the gut punch of a Catholic horror figure. The Catholic Church, with its rituals, imagery, and air of authority, had long been fertile ground for horror storytelling. From possession films like The Exorcist to gothic tales of haunted monasteries, nothing unnerves quite like corrupted symbols of faith. So when James Wan and his team sought to expand the Conjuring universe, they reached into the demonological toolkit and pulled out Valak. But they didn't keep him in his childlike form. Instead, they dressed him in the most provocative disguise possible, the habit of a nun. Overnight, the obscure figure from 16th century manuscripts became the face of 21st century fear. The reasoning was brilliant in its simplicity. What could be more shocking than taking the symbol of purity, devotion, and safety, and twisting it into a vessel of horror? A nun, after all, is meant to embody service to God, When that image is inverted, when holiness itself becomes a mask for malevolence, the effect is deeply unsettling. It was not the first time horror played with corrupted innocence, but it was one of the most visually effective. The glowing yellow eyes set in a pale face, framed by the black wimple, gave audiences a figure that felt both familiar and alien. You didn't need a crash course in medieval grimoires to shudder. The fear was instant, primal, and tied to cultural memory. For Catholic viewers, it cut even deeper, poking at the subconscious dread of betrayal by the very institution meant to protect. For non-Catholic viewers, the effect still worked. Everyone recognizes a nun, and everyone can feel the wrongness when that image is turned inside out. The contrast between grimoire Valak and cinematic Valak could not be starker. In the old texts, he is a boyish figure who guides treasure hunters and commands serpents. In the films, he is a monstrous nun with jagged teeth, a predator stalking the faithful through candlelit halls. Yet in both versions, the same thread remains. Valak embodies deceptive appearances. In the manuscripts, he looks angelic but wields terrifying power. In the films, he looks holy but is utterly demonic. Hollywood didn't invent that paradox. They simply modernized it, using Catholic iconography as the canvas. This twist worked so well because it played into a cultural anxiety simmering for decades. The late 20th and early 21st centuries were rife with scandals, doubts, and fears surrounding organized religion. Turning a nun into a vessel of horror tapped into the loss of faith and the fear of corruption at the very heart of the sacred. It is horror as mirror, reflecting societal anxieties back at the audience. And because the Conjuring franchise claimed to be based on true events, it blurred the line even further, lending its demons an aura of authenticity that viewers couldn't easily shake off. Valak's cinematic survival also shows how horror reinvents old material. A medieval demon catalogued by scholars became a blockbuster villain not by accident, but because his core qualities lent themselves to reinvention. He was obscure enough that filmmakers had creative freedom, yet distinct enough that they could claim historical authenticity. The dragon-riding child was never going to haunt Lorraine Warren's visions on screen, but the principle of deception, of innocent appearance masking evil intent, translated perfectly into the terrifying nun. By the time The Conjuring 2 hit theaters, Valak was no longer an obscure name buried in grimoires. He was the face of fear. Fans left the theater buzzing, speculating, sharing theories, making memes. The Warrens' case files gave him narrative grounding, Catholic imagery gave him cultural punch, and Hollywood gave him teeth sharp enough to slash across the collective imagination. And that is how the leap was made. From occult texts read only by ritual magicians to occult pop culture consumed by millions, Valak survived because he was both strange and flexible, an ancient demon who could wear new disguises to terrify each generation. In the 16th century, he was a child on a dragon. In the 21st, he became the nun who lurks at the end of the hallway, just beyond the flicker of candlelight. Both forms are masks for the same truth. Evil is rarely what it seems at first glance, and that is why Valak endures. When The Conjuring 2 released in theaters, audiences walked in expecting another ghost story, another case file dramatized from the Warrens' paranormal investigations. What they got instead was something far more enduring. Out of the shadows stepped a figure in black robes, her eyes burning like candles in the dark, her face pale as death. She barely spoke, she rarely moved quickly, yet she owned the screen. This was the moment Valak, the obscure medieval demon, truly became the nun. James Wan has said in interviews that the inspiration for the nun was tied both to Lorraine Warren's accounts and to a directorial decision. According to the story, Lorraine claimed she had visions of a dark, hooded figure that represented a demonic presence pursuing her. When Wan heard this, he understood he had the seed of an unforgettable antagonist. But visions alone don't make a monster. He needed a design that would instantly resonate, that would be as terrifying in a still image as it was in motion. And so, Valak, once a child on a dragon in 16th century manuscripts, was reborn as the most sinister nun to ever step across a movie screen. Her introduction in The Conjuring 2 is a masterclass in suspense. We don't get a long explanation. We don't even know her name at first. Instead, she appears in fleeting glimpses, watching Lorraine from the corners of a vision, looming in the background of a candlelit chapel, emerging from a painting that seems alive. The absence of detail makes her scarier. We sense the threat without fully understanding it. By the time she reveals her true identity, Valak has already lodged herself into the subconscious of the audience. The design itself is deceptively simple. Take the instantly recognizable image of a nun, the black habit, and wimple that signal purity, devotion, and discipline. Then drain all the safety out of it. Her skin is corpse white, almost blue, as if blood has abandoned her body. Her lips are blackened, her eyes a glowing sulphurous yellow that slice through the darkness. The habit drapes heavily, swallowing her body in shadow so that her face floats in the void. She moves in silence, a predator disguised as prey, and when she does attack, it's with sudden, jarring violence that feels like a breach of sacred space. Why does this disguise work so well as horror? Because it subverts something deeply ingrained in cultural memory. A nun is not supposed to be frightening. She is supposed to embody the opposite: purity, devotion, protection, a life committed to God. Horror thrives when it takes what is safe and flips it upside down. The nun is not just a monster in a costume, she is visual blasphemy. She is corrupted innocence, a perversion of holiness, a mockery of the sacred. Every time she appears, the viewer feels the gut punch of recognition followed by violation. You know what you're seeing, and you know it's wrong. The nun takes advantage of an old horror trick: the uncanny inversion. Think of dolls with glass eyes, clowns with painted smiles, children singing nursery rhymes in the dark. They all twist something familiar into something sinister. The nun does the same with religious imagery. For Catholic audiences, the impact is especially sharp. The habit is not just a costume, it represents centuries of devotion, sacrifice, and sacred vows. Seeing that turned into a vessel for demonic evil cuts at a subconscious level, the kind of fear that doesn't require words. For non-Catholic audiences, the effect still holds. Even without personal ties to the imagery, the visual language of religion carries weight. The violation is universal. In The Conjuring 2, this effect was amplified by the way Valak haunted Lorraine specifically. She doesn't just terrorize random victims. She intrudes into the visions of the most faithful, the one person supposedly equipped to resist her. That inversion, the demon invading the mind of the clairvoyant Catholic wife, gives the nun an authority other monsters lack. She is not a stray ghost rattling chains. She is a deliberate affront to faith itself. The character proved so compelling that she demanded her own film. The Nun, released in 2018, expanded her backstory and cemented her status as a central figure in the Conjuring universe. Set in a Romanian abbey, the film leaned fully into the Gothic horror aesthetic: crumbling castles, fog-drenched graveyards, and candlelit corridors where shadows stretch too far. Here, the nun is not just a jump scare. She is mythologized, given history, tied to ancient evil sealed within holy ground. The film transforms her into both legend and spectacle. And yet, despite the lore expansions, the power of the character still rests in her visual design. Strip away the details of the abbey and the priests, and you're left with that face in the dark. The glowing eyes, the pale skin, the silent approach, the sense that you are being watched by something that should be holy but isn't. In a franchise filled with cursed dolls, crooked men, and howling spirits, the nun became the icon precisely because she is so recognizable and so wrong at the same time. Valak's cinematic transformation also reflects a clever understanding of horror marketing. A nun's face on a poster is instantly memorable. You don't need to explain who she is. You don't need to summarize the lore. Audiences know at a glance that this is unsettling, and they want to know why. That recognition is what turned the nun into a breakout star. In the age of memes and viral images, a monster needs to be iconic in silhouette, terrifying in close-up, and flexible enough to spawn endless speculation. Valak as a nun checked every box. It's worth remembering, too, that James Wan could have kept the grimoire description intact. He could have put a child on a dragon on screen, but that wouldn't have worked. Modern audiences are not haunted by medieval imagery the way 16th century Europeans were. Dragons have been tamed by fantasy. Children riding beasts are more whimsical than horrifying. To scare today's viewers, the design needed to speak to today's anxieties. And in a world where scandals and doubts about organized religion were never far from the headlines, what better disguise than a nun? The transformation was both logical and devastatingly effective. So when we talk about Valak's cinematic journey, it isn't just about taking a demon from an old book and putting it on screen. It's about translation. The filmmakers took the essence of Valak, deceptive appearance hiding immense evil, and adapted it to a form that would cut deepest into modern fear. The childlike mask became the nun's habit. The dragon became the abbey. The legions of demons became jump scares echoing down stone corridors. The translation worked so well that many fans now assume Valak was always imagined this way. That's how complete the transformation has been. From the Warrens' case files to James Wan's imagination, from obscure manuscripts to blockbuster posters, Valak found a disguise that made him unforgettable. The nun works not because of elaborate dialogue or complex backstory, but because she is the embodiment of corrupted holiness. Every time she stares through those glowing eyes, the audience sees not just a monster, but the betrayal of something sacred. That is horror at its most potent, and it's why Valak will never be just another name in a grimoire again. When the Conjuring universe began, no one could have predicted just how quickly it would expand into one of the most successful horror franchises of all time. What started as a haunted house story rooted in the Warrens' case files snowballed into a cinematic empire with sequels, prequels, and spin-offs. At the center of this global explosion stood the figure who would become the franchise's most marketable monster. Not the haunted doll, Annabelle, not even the crooked man lurking in shadows, but the black-robed, pale-faced figure audiences now know simply as the Nun. The Nun didn't take long to break free from the Conjuring 2. Audiences left theaters buzzing, not about the Hodgson family or the poltergeist, but about the terrifying sister with glowing eyes. Studio executives saw the potential immediately. Here was a monster that could stand on her own, an image so powerful it barely needed introduction. And so in 2018, The Nun premiered as a spin-off, plunging viewers into the Gothic ruins of a Romanian abbey and turning Valak into the headline act. The results were staggering. The film earned over $360 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing installment in the entire Conjuring franchise at the time. Think about that for a moment. A demon who began as a footnote in 16th century grimoires outperformed every other ghost, doll, and spirit in one of horror's most bankable universes. The Nun didn't just scare audiences. She became a cultural event. Her image flooded the internet. Memes spread across Twitter and Instagram. Fans posted photos of themselves dressed as the Nun at Halloween parties, conventions, and even weddings. Makeup tutorials on YouTube taught viewers how to get the pale skin, the blackened lips, and the glowing eyes just right. In a matter of months, Valak had jumped from obscure demonology into the same cultural space once reserved for icons like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, or Pennywise the Clown. She was instantly recognizable, instantly memeable, and endlessly terrifying. Why did this version of Valak strike such a chord? To answer that, it helps to compare the cinematic nun with the figure preserved in old grimoires. In the manuscripts, Valak is a child with an angelic face riding a two-headed dragon. He commands legions of demons, reveals hidden treasures, and summons serpents at will. He is strange, even unsettling, but not immediately horrifying to modern eyes. The imagery belongs to a world of medieval cosmology, where demons were organized like officers in a dark army. On screen, however, Valak became something else entirely. The childlike commander was replaced by a figure designed to weaponize cultural anxiety. The black habit and glowing eyes tap into fears of corrupted innocence and desecrated holiness. The silent movements and sudden attacks trigger the instinctive dread of predators. Where the grimoire Valak was obscure and arcane, the cinematic Valak became instantly legible. Anyone could look at the nun and understand she represented danger, evil, and blasphemy. No background in demonology required. That accessibility is crucial. The Conjuring films reached audiences in dozens of countries, many of whom might never have heard of the Lesser Key of Solomon or Pseudomonarchia Daemonum. But they all recognized a nun. The image transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. Whether you were Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Hindu, or atheist, the sight of a holy figure twisted into a demonic mockery struck a universal nerve. Horror works best when it plays on shared symbols, and the nun's disguise was one of the most effective shared symbols of all. There is also something deeply modern about her appeal. In an era where scandals have eroded public trust in religious institutions, the nun embodies a fear that the sacred is not safe. She is not just another monster hiding under the bed. She is a symbol of betrayal, of faith inverted into something hostile. That made her not only terrifying on screen, but resonant off it. People shared images of the nun online, not just because she was scary, but because she carried meaning. She stood at the intersection of entertainment, religion, and cultural anxiety. The global explosion of the Conjuring universe also helped solidify her place as a horror icon. Each film fed into the next, creating a mythology that audiences could follow like a shared campfire tale. When the nun appeared in marketing materials, fans knew they were getting another piece of that story, another thread in the larger web of supernatural terror. In that sense, Valak became more than just a character. She became the mascot of a modern horror mythos, a demon rebranded for the age of cinematic universes. What makes this transformation even more remarkable is how far it strays from the source. The medieval Valak was one entry in a catalogue of 72 spirits, no more or less important than dozens of others. His powers were specific, his image bizarre, his lore obscure. There was no hint that he would one day headline his own film or outsell every other demon at the box office. Yet, by reinventing him through Catholic imagery and cinematic design, Hollywood gave Valak a second life, one that was louder, brighter, and far more terrifying than anything imagined by 16th century occultists. And that is why audiences worldwide latched onto this version. The child on a dragon might interest scholars, but the terrifying nun in the dark hallway frightens everyone. It is a universal nightmare, accessible across borders, cultures, and languages. People may not agree on theology or demonology, but they can all agree that the nun's yellow eyes glowing in the shadows are something you do not want to see at the foot of your bed. In the end, the global explosion of the nun proves a simple truth about horror. Old demons survive not by staying the same, but by adapting to new fears. Valak transformed from an obscure figure in Latin texts into a blockbuster villain precisely because the disguise changed. And in that transformation, She became one of the defining horror icons of our era, proof that sometimes the scariest monsters are not born, they are reinvented. When The Nun proved itself to be a global sensation, it was only a matter of time before Hollywood called her back for an encore. The Conjuring universe had already mastered the art of spin-offs, weaving together cursed dolls, haunted families, and ghostly side stories into one interconnected web. Valak was too powerful a presence, both financially and culturally, to remain confined to a single movie. So the sequel arrived, and with it, an expansion of her mythology that stretched deeper into the franchise's lore. The Nun 2 revisited the Romanian abbey but shifted the focus from mere Gothic atmosphere to a broader exploration of Valak's reach. Where the first film treated her as an almost elemental force sealed within holy ground, the sequel suggested she was far more deliberate, hunting, strategizing, and manipulating events. The child on the dragon from the grimoires may have been long gone, but traces of that commanding presence slipped through. Here was not just a monster who popped up in visions. Here was a villain who orchestrated, who lingered, who refused to fade into the shadows. Across the wider Conjuring universe, Valak's role has been carefully managed. In The Conjuring 2, she appeared almost as a cameo at first, a secondary threat who eventually revealed herself as the true antagonist. In The Nun, she stepped fully into the spotlight as the central villain. In The Nun 2, she returned not as a novelty, but as an icon, carrying with her the weight of fan expectations and franchise mythology. This gradual escalation mirrors how other horror icons, Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers, rose from one film to many. It is the arc of a monster who outgrows the original story and becomes a brand in herself. Fans have not been slow to speculate about her deeper connections. Some theorize that Valak's presence is the glue holding the Conjuring universe together. After all, she is not just tied to the Warrens through Lorraine's visions. She also appears to ripple through other storylines, lurking in shadows that connect to Annabelle, to cursed relics, even to the mysterious crooked man who was once teased for his own spin-off. Theories abound that Valak might be pulling strings behind the scenes, a kind of demonic mastermind orchestrating chaos across multiple films. One particularly popular fan theory links Valak directly to Annabelle, suggesting that the doll is not merely cursed, but acts as a vessel or conduit for Valak's influence. The logic goes like this. Annabelle's presence in the Warrens' museum, alongside the nun's repeated appearances, hints at a hierarchy where Valak uses cursed objects and weaker spirits as pawns in a larger game. It's the cinematic echo of the grimoire description, where Valak commands legions. Only this time, the legions are horror set pieces, dolls, paintings, crooked shadows that all point back to the same general. Other fans tie Valak's persistence to Lorraine Warren's spiritual sensitivity. In their view, Valak is less a random demon and more a personal nemesis, fixated on Lorraine because of her clairvoyance. This interpretation casts Valak as not just a monster, but a rival, almost like the Joker to Lorraine's Batman, feeding off her faith and visions. The movies never spell this out fully, but the hints are enough to fuel endless debates, videos, and Reddit threads. What all these theories point to is something larger than just franchise continuity. They show how Valak has been positioned as a modern demon icon. Unlike the old grimoires where demons were fixed in lists, modern cinema thrives on expansion. A character must grow, adapt, and accumulate mythology. With each film, Valak has shifted roles, from hidden menace to headline villain to potential architect of a larger demonic hierarchy. That flexibility is exactly what keeps audiences engaged. It also reveals how franchises today build monsters not just as scares, but as intellectual property. Valak is no longer a demon from the 16th century. She is a brand. Her image sells tickets, costumes, Funko Pops, and Halloween decorations. She spawns theories and YouTube breakdowns, drawing audiences deeper into the lore. Horror icons thrive when they become more than just characters. They become ecosystems. Freddy had his glove, Jason his mask, Pennywise his balloon. Valak has her habit and her glowing eyes, a look so simple yet so potent that it can carry film after film. And yet, for all the expansion, her core remains the same. She is the inversion of holiness, the corruption of innocence, the face of betrayal dressed as devotion. That consistency anchors her, even as sequels and spin-offs pile on layers of mythology. Fans may debate her role in the demon hierarchy or her connection to Annabelle, but no one mistakes her for anything less than the central terror of the franchise. She has become the gravity well around which the Conjuring universe orbits. This speaks volumes about how modern horror works. Gone are the days when a monster terrified once and then faded away. Today, horror icons are cultivated like superheroes, nurtured across sequels and universes. Valak is proof of concept. Take an obscure demon, reinvent it with a killer design, and then build a mythology around it piece by piece. Each film adds more, not necessarily to answer questions, but to keep audiences hungry. The mystery is the point. The speculation is the engagement. The fear is the hook that ensures people return for more. So when we watch The Nun 2 and hear whispers of future appearances, we are not just watching another chapter, we are watching the careful construction of a demon icon for the modern age. Valak is no longer trapped in parchment or limited to one abbey. She is a cinematic force, expanding outward, feeding on imagination, becoming something larger with each new story. And in doing so, she proves that in the world of modern horror, demons don't just survive, they evolve. At the heart of Valak's transformation into the nun lies more than just clever design or box office strategy. What makes her so enduring is the symbolism she carries, the cultural weight behind her pale face and black habit. Horror monsters stick with us not because of the jump scares, but because of what they represent. The nun works because she is more than a demon in makeup. She is corrupted innocence, twisted holiness, a symbol of the betrayal of sacred trust. A nun is supposed to embody purity and devotion. She represents service to God, withdrawal from worldly temptation, and commitment to faith. To see that figure turned into a vessel of horror is jarring in the extreme. The habit, once a sign of safety, becomes a cloak of menace. The glowing eyes are not windows into holiness, but into something sulphurous and vile. The silence that once suggested peace becomes the silence of a predator stalking its prey. Every part of the design is built on inversion. What should comfort you instead terrifies you. That is why Valak, as the nun, lingers in the imagination long after the credits roll. This inversion taps into a deep, primal fear. Humans crave trust in sacred figures. Throughout history, people have turned to priests, monks, nuns, or shamans for guidance and reassurance. The idea that those very figures could be corrupt or hostile is terrifying. It is not simply fear of the unknown, it is fear of betrayal by what should be most trustworthy. In that sense, the nun is not just a monster. She is a cultural wound. She embodies the nightmare that faith itself can become dangerous. This symbolism grows even stronger when compared to her origins in medieval demonology. In the grimoires, Valak appears as a child with an angelic face, riding a dragon and commanding legions of demons. The contrast is striking. There, the fear lies in deception. A childlike face conceals terrifying power. The danger is that innocence is a mask for evil authority. It is a warning against trusting appearances, a reminder that temptation may come wrapped in beauty. In Hollywood, that theme of deceptive appearances is preserved but reimagined for modern anxieties. The child on the dragon becomes the nun in the abbey. Both are masks, both play on innocence, both hide corruption. But where the grimoire Valak spoke to a medieval obsession with order and hierarchy, the cinematic Valak speaks to a modern fear of religion itself. The Catholic nightmare works because it preys on the dread that the sacred can be profaned, that faith can collapse, that the institutions meant to protect souls may instead destroy them. This is not accidental. The Conjuring universe thrives on blurring the line between faith and horror. Crucifixes twist, holy water boils, priests tremble, and prayers fail. The Nun takes that logic to its ultimate extreme. Instead of objects of faith being corrupted, the very embodiment of faith itself is corrupted. It is horror as blasphemy, horror as betrayal. That makes her far more potent than a generic demon with horns and claws. On a symbolic level, the nun also embodies the fear of losing belief. She represents what happens when faith no longer feels safe. In an age where institutions are questioned, scandals exposed, and long-trusted systems revealed to be flawed, the nun resonates as a figure of disillusionment. She is not just a supernatural villain. She is the horror of realizing that even the sacred can rot. That realization is more terrifying than any jump scare. It shakes the ground beneath people's sense of meaning. Audiences feel this even if they cannot articulate it. That is why the nun works across cultures. You don't need to be Catholic to sense the wrongness. Everyone knows what a nun is supposed to represent. Everyone feels the betrayal when that image is twisted. It is a universal language of fear, accessible even to those who have never stepped inside a church. The habit and the glowing eyes do the work without translation. The difference between Valak's medieval and modern identities also reveals how horror adapts to reflect cultural anxieties. For 16th century Europeans, the fear was that demons were part of a structured universe, invisible yet organized, capable of tempting humans toward greed and destruction. That is why the grimoire Valak was tied to treasure hunting and serpents. For 21st century audiences, the fear is not treasure or serpents, but the collapse of faith, the suspicion that holiness itself can become hostile. That is why the cinematic Valak is a nun. Both versions are products of their times, mirrors reflecting the deepest cultural fears back at those who invoke them. It is also worth noting how the nun capitalizes on visual blasphemy. Horror often shocks by transgressing taboos. Blood, death, sexuality, all are common taboos pushed by horror films. But blasphemy is one of the oldest and strongest taboos of all. To show a nun as a demon is to break a sacred image, to create instant unease. Even those without strong religious ties recognize the violation. That violation is what makes the image so powerful. It is not just scary, it is offensive to the sacred, and that offense is precisely what burns it into memory. The nun's success shows how horror monsters function as cultural symbols. Freddy Krueger represents the fear of violated innocence in the suburbs. Jason Voorhees embodies vengeance born of neglect. Pennywise channels childhood terror into monstrous form. And Valak, in her nun disguise, represents the terror of corrupted holiness, the betrayal of the sacred, the loss of trust in faith itself. She is a mirror of cultural unease, a reminder that demons are always reinvented to reflect the fears of the age. In the end, Valak's meaning in demonology and in Hollywood could not be more different, yet they are connected by the same thread. In the grimoires, he is the child commander, innocent in form yet dreadful in power, a warning against deceptive appearances. In Hollywood, she is the nun, holy in form yet vile in essence, a warning against the collapse of faith. Both are faces of the same archetype. Evil that hides behind a mask of purity. That archetype is timeless, and that is why the nun continues to haunt audiences. She is not just a monster in a movie, she is a cultural symbol, a living reminder that what should protect us can also destroy us. She demands fear where faith once was. She is the horror of corrupted innocence, the terror of twisted holiness, the embodiment of betrayal dressed in black and white. That is why her stare follows you out of the theater, into the night, and into the corners of your imagination long after the screen has gone dark. What happens when a medieval demon once hidden in Latin manuscripts suddenly finds herself dancing across TikTok? That is the strange afterlife of Valak in the 21st century. A figure who once lived quietly in dusty grimoires, invoked by ritual magicians with trembling voices, is now plastered on memes, turned into GIF reactions, and worn as Halloween costumes by kids too young to even rent an R-rated film. The irony is delicious. The same demon that 16th century scholars wrote about in hushed tones now shows up as a punchline in group chats. The transformation into a meme monster began almost as soon as The Conjuring 2 hit theaters. Audiences were so unnerved by the nun's sudden appearances that they started screenshotting her scenes and sharing them online. A frame of Valak standing at the end of a hallway could be captioned 100 different ways. When you realize you left the oven on. Me waiting for the Uber driver who's 2 minutes away for 10 minutes. Horror turned into humor. Fear flipped into relatability. The image was too strong not to recycle. The release of The Nun only poured fuel on the fire. With her own movie came a flood of promotional images, posters, and trailers, all ripe for internet parody. Halloween in particular saw an explosion of nun-themed memes. Photos of partygoers in glowing-eyed makeup circulated with captions like, "Sister Mary's scary a lot." TikTok creators staged skits where the nun lurked behind doors or photo-bombed mirror selfies. Twitter filled with fan edits that remixed her terrifying stare into comedy gold. She became both terrifying and hilarious, a figure who could dominate the box office and the meme feed in the same week. What makes the nun so memeable is the same thing that makes her terrifying on screen: simplicity. The silhouette is instantly recognizable. The black habit, the pale face, the yellow eyes. It's a design so iconic that it works in a jump scare and in a Photoshop template. You don't need context. One glance, and you know exactly who it is. That clarity is internet rocket fuel. The same design choices that terrified audiences made her perfect for viral culture. Of course, this raises the question, is the nun still scary once she becomes a meme template? Horror thrives on atmosphere, on the careful build-up of tension. Memes strip all that away. They take the still image, flatten it, and reframe it as comedy. The jump scare becomes a joke. The terrifying visage becomes relatable. On one hand, that deflates the fear. Once you've seen the nun captioned, "Me going to the fridge at 3 a.m., it's harder to take her seriously in a darkened theater. On the other hand, memes also cement her status. They keep her alive in the culture long after the credits roll. Consider how other horror icons made the same leap. Freddy Krueger ended up on t-shirts, cartoons, and even rap battles. Pennywise danced his way into meme culture after the IT reboot. Ghostface from Scream became a Halloween staple that kids could laugh at as much as scream at. Far from killing the fear, the meme age extended their lifespan. Once a monster becomes a meme, they're no longer confined to the screen. They live in everyday conversation, in jokes, in costumes, in digital shorthand. The nun followed the same path. The irony runs even deeper when you remember where Valak began. In the 16th century, he was described as a child commanding legions of demons, invoked in ritual magic to find treasure or summon serpents. His name was whispered, his powers feared, his image strange enough to unsettle even the most hardened occultist. He was meant to be secret knowledge, hidden in grimoires that only the initiated could read. And now? That same name trends on TikTok, where teenagers edit her into dance clips and lip-sync to Hollaback Girl with glowing eyes. From grimoire to meme, few demons have traveled so far. This strange evolution says something about horror in the digital age. Monsters are no longer just consumed in theaters. They are circulated, remixed, reinterpreted. Fear is not just experienced but shared, often immediately after watching. The meme is a coping mechanism, a way to laugh at what once terrified you. It's also a way to claim ownership. By turning the nun into a joke, audiences assert control over the fear. They transform what was once overwhelming into something manageable, even funny. But here's the twist. The fear never entirely goes away. Even in meme form, the nun retains her aura. The glowing eyes and pale face are still unsettling, no matter how silly the caption. The internet may laugh, but the image sticks. That is the power of iconic design. The meme may deflate the scare in the moment, but it also ensures the demon never fades from collective imagination. She becomes part of everyday digital language, always lurking, always one scroll away. There's also a cultural potency in this irony. A demon once catalogued by medieval scholars as a commander of legions now commands millions of views on social media. He was once invoked in ritual circles, now invoked in hashtags. What hasn't changed is the function. Valak still demands attention, still commands a following, still spreads across networks. The medium shifted from parchment to pixels, but the effect is eerily similar. People are still calling his name, still sharing his image, still keeping him alive. So, is the nun still terrifying when she's a meme? The answer is yes and no. The meme culture softens her edges, makes her laughable, even endearing at times. But it also keeps her omnipresent, ensuring that when she does return to the big screen, the fear reignites. Audiences can laugh at the joke online and still flinch in the theater when she steps out of the shadows. That tension between humor and horror is part of why she works so well in the first place. Valak's journey into meme culture is not the end of her story. It's simply another mask, another adaptation. Just as the child on the dragon became the nun in the abbey became the nun on TikTok. The demon evolves, the disguise changes, but the power remains. Whether she's terrifying Lorraine Warren in a vision or photobombing a Halloween meme, Valak continues to haunt culture in ways no 16th century scribe could have imagined. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. The demon is everywhere, even in your feed, waiting for the scroll. Valak's story is one of the strangest journeys in horror history. In one form, he is a medieval demon, written into grimoires with painstaking detail, a childlike commander perched on a two-headed dragon, ordering legions of spirits to dig up treasures and summon serpents. In another, he is the face of Hollywood horror, draped in a black habit, eyes glowing like embers in a void, stalking the halls of abbeys and the dreams of Lorraine Warren. The two versions could not look more different, yet they are bound by the same thread. Both remind us that appearances deceive, that innocence and holiness can be masks for something darker lurking underneath. That contrast is what makes Valak so fascinating. In the grimoires, he is arcane knowledge, a secret name for magicians to whisper in their circles. In the films, he is a pop culture icon, plastered on posters, memes, and Halloween costumes. Both versions are about control. The medieval Valak was catalogued so humans could claim power over him. The cinematic Valak was reinvented so audiences could face their fear of corrupted faith. In each age, he is shaped to reflect the anxieties of the time. Her glassy stare on the big screen isn't just a jump scare. It's the echo of centuries of demonology rewritten for modern horror. It carries the weight of 16th century fears about hidden spirits and modern fears about broken faith. That is why she resonates so strongly. She is not just another monster. She is a mirror, reflecting our deepest dread that the things we trust most can betray us. And yet, even mirrors can be funny when held at the right angle. That's why Valak is also a meme. A Halloween costume, a TikTok clip that makes you laugh as much as shiver. The same demon once feared in rituals is now a template for internet jokes. Good luck trying to banish her if she's already in your group chat. So where does that leave us? With a demon who has been everything from a medieval commander to a blockbuster villain to a meme queen of the digital age, Valak has proven that demons survive by adapting, slipping into new disguises that speak to each generation's fears. Yesterday it was the child on the dragon, today it is the nun in the abbey. Tomorrow, who knows? But one thing is certain, Valak will not be the last demon to make this leap from parchment to pop culture. Which raises the real question, who should we unmask next? There are countless spirits, monsters, and demons lurking in folklore and forgotten books, waiting for their cinematic rebirth. So tell me in the comments, which other demons of horror should we drag out of the shadows and put under the spotlight? Because if Valak has taught us anything, it's that the scariest monsters never really die. They just change costumes, find a new stage, and wait for us to look their way again. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.